And before I get started, I just want to introduce our panel. Standard disclaimer first. This is the agenda. We're going to break the agenda into 3 segments. One is cloud desktop as enabler. We're also going to spend a little bit of time talking about how IT is transformed into a service industry. And I'll share a simple example of how all of us in the morning go to the coffee shop and the experience there and the experience compared to traditional IT. And then we'll wrap up into how all of this flows into a TCO, basically a costing model of IT service going forward. So I'm Joe Thykattil. I'm a technology architect. I just recently started with the company I'm working for, Time Warner Cable Navisite. And before that, I was an infrastructure manager for a power company in Chicago, and I'm still in Chicago. And I also spent some time working at a few hedge funds in Chicago, as well as a few of the local banks, ABN AMRO, et cetera. To my left is Sandra Palumbo. So Sandra, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Okay, thanks, Joe. Sandra Palumbo. I am also with Time Warner Cable Navisite as Director of Product Marketing for our Enterprise Portfolio, which includes the Navisite portfolio of services, cloud, desktop as a service, managed hosting, managed applications. Want me to do more?
Hi, my name is Dobbins. I'm a Director of Solution Architects at Navisite, Time Warner Cable. I have about 18 years worth of experience in the IT space. I have some relatively useful experience relative to end-user computing, deploying from working for a large reseller, deploying tens of thousands of desktops across very large companies, Fortune 1000 companies. Certain projects as a resident consultant, defining IT standards for hardware, software, and supporting IT services for end-user computing. So I have some experience that I can share.
Super. And my name's David Stafford. I'm with VMware as a Director of Product Management for our Horizon DaaS product line. Contrary to popular belief, I'm not 20 years old. I've actually been doing this for about 20 years, so my entire career has been in the end-user computing space. I manage desktops for Cisco Systems internal IT. So being on the other side of this discussion as a customer is where a majority of my experience comes from. I've been with VMware now for the last 5 years, responsible for the DaaS portfolio. One of the things that we're excited about today is to be able to have Navisite being able to join us to discuss this, because one of the things of the Horizon DaaS portfolio is that we've been delivering this as a service through our service provider channel longer than any other. And Navisite's absolutely one of our premier partners in being able to make this offering possible, handling lots of unique challenges that a generic offering just will never be ready for. So excited to have the group to my right to step us through it.
Great, thank you. So as you can see, we have some diversity in backgrounds, and hopefully that will lend some credibility in terms of sharing experiences with you all today. The first topic we're going to talk about is cloud desktops as a business enabler. And moving right along, I want to take you through some timelines, right? We're in 2014. IT back in 1980, for all of you who remember, and 1990 and 2000 and 2014 has changed significantly. It has become more and more service-oriented. And these are some of the tipping points that have created that change. Migration to Windows 7, the mobility. As you know, BYOD is here to stay. We're seeing more and more people, especially executives, coming into the IT organization saying, hey, you as IT support this going forward. I see that very often. How many of you have seen that? Where executives come in and say, hey, go and, yeah, exactly. So you know exactly what I'm talking about, and you know that's here to stay. That's not going away. Tighter IT budgets. It used to be we would look at technology and say, hey, back in the 80s and 90s, hey, this could be useful. Nowadays, we have to sharply show the cost-benefit analysis financially. And also the additional factor being security, right? If you have your system say, for example, a desktop that could potentially get lost in the trunk of the car, et cetera, as opposed to, say, something where the back end is in a secure, world-class data center. There are different security advantages to the latter, right? Having that desktop housed in the secure data center, and basically your Zero client or your laptop or your Google Chromebook being the endpoint for that view. And here's a bit of a breakdown of that. That first point there is very critical, the mindset and change in adoption. Used to be, like I mentioned earlier, 1980s, 1990s, we all would see interesting technology at work, and then we would bring those pieces at home. Now the change is in the opposite direction. We see interesting technology at home with our children, our family, our peers, colleagues, and we expect those services to be available at the office. That is the new model. And there are significant drivers and sponsors. Like I mentioned, IT executives, saying, I'm bringing in my Apple MacBook, figure out how to support this going forward. And they're going to continue doing it. That's not a trend that's going to stop. And like I mentioned, the barriers and concerns, a lot of this around is cost and security. It used to be cloud and these type of services had a lot of costs associated with it. Now it's highly commoditized. It's very much a consumption-based model. So this can be very transformational, and you've all have seen a lot of this, and we've seen it. I've seen it as an infrastructure manager at a large power company in Chicago. I'll just share one experience, and then we'll move to the panel to share some of their experiences. I'll tell you about a merger and acquisition that we did, a power company in Chicago. We purchased a wind farm system that was based out in Des Moines, Iowa. During a 9-month merger integration phase, we had a temporary need to house desktops externally. And the way we did that at the time was a cloud-based VDI system. And what I mean by that is the data center was actually housed at a third party, not our internal data center. But the advantage that gave us, it gave us the option of moving those systems to a provider and pay as you go during those 9 months. We did not have to invest in the server hardware, the labor, which is a huge piece, as you'll see later on when we go more into the financial analysis, as well as the security implications. So that's just one example. And also what that allowed is, it allowed the staff that were based in Des Moines to move over a couple weeks into the Chicago area and the Baltimore area as needed. It didn't have to be a forklift operation, where IT had to stand up their desktops in the locations they were going to be at, where you'd have 2 sets of pieces of hardware, right? One in Des Moines for the same desktop and one in Chicago or Baltimore. They could be moved seamlessly. So let me move it to the panel to share some experiences. David, Sandra, Keith, anything that you all can share about desktop enablement?
Maybe I'll just start, right? We all can think of a really good use case for a virtual desktop or a virtual application, right? Nobody's foolish enough to think that it's 100% of the entire environment. But in pretty much every organization, there is a use case. Is that a fair premise to start from? So if we know that there's a use case, the thing that we see time and time again are barriers to start and barriers to scale. Because for you to go and get those very first 10 users up with a virtual desktop or a published application, you're needing to make a leap of faith that you've attended all the right VMworld sessions, you've read all the right vendor marketing, you've picked the right storage, the right flash, the right dedupe, the right link clone, all of these things have to align so that you know you'll be successful. And heaven forbid you are, because what happens when you hit 500? What happens when you hit 600, 700 users, and suddenly you need a new architecture? And so finding the use cases, I think, is the easy part. We all know where we can use it, but it's one of those things where who in their right mind would want to go and try to architect this, especially when you're starting out or when you think that you might need to scale rapidly. And so that's where I'm a huge fan of the desktop as a service model.
Yeah, I would agree. Especially coming from an IT perspective, is if this is something new, do you really want to make an investment that's so significant in training, capex that you have to buy a lot of equipment, and then you have a variability that you may fail. And what we've seen as a service provider, what we're providing the cloud-based desktops is all of the customers that are coming to us have a VDI story. And that story is, it started off great, but the challenge was over time the performance degraded, and they either didn't have a full-time VDI skill set internally, they had to look to some VAR or reseller to mitigate those changes, and then over time, it became an end-user acceptance challenge, where the end users, they basically didn't want to deal with it anymore. So adoption is very important. You need to be successful right away, and you need to maintain that SLA of performance. Otherwise, the end user community is very fickle, and being in the IT department, it's difficult, right? Their perception of us is always up and down all the time.
Yeah, and actually to add on, Keith, where you were going with that, with the end user side of it and acceptance, because to me, that does become, and as Joe was talking about with the whole consumerization of IT, as when I was an analyst prior to joining Time Warner Cable, covering the cloud computing space, managed services space, that was something we were always talking about. It was certainly a shift we saw in, it wasn't IT pushing products out into the workforce, it was the workforce kind of demanding and wanting certain abilities and capabilities, and IT responding to that. And I think understanding that your end users are looking for something that's flexible, or want to use their own devices, or want to be able to collaborate, as we're all working in a less traditional environment of everyone being in the same physical location, that can help, I think, an organization know when is a good time, or a particular pockets within the organization that might be ripe for this type of technology and service to address some specific needs, because as Keith was saying, the end user adoption can make or break the success of a project in an organization.
And similar to what the previous two comments were, you can actually move forward with the cloud provider. You can distribute the cloud desktops into your environment. You can test those use cases, and you can formalize a real strategy around it without taking that CapEx huge investment leap. And then if the performance is great, maybe you subscribe, or maybe you deliver it internally, but at least you've proven that this is going to work in your organization. We've also seen stories where companies failed so badly, unfortunately, and it's not because of VMware, or VDI in general, but they failed so badly that I've heard several stories where they actually went back to the vendor and they sacrificed a lot of their money and tried to get some kind of refund, and they got some money back, but they lost a lot of money, and they lost a huge amount of credibility within their user base. So it was a total disaster. I haven't seen that as a common case, but the potential does exist.
Yep. Great comments, great stories there. And just a note on logistics, if you have questions, feel free to ask. We have a microphone there in the center. We will allot some time at the end for Q&A as well. So that was a segment on desktop as an enabler. Let's move directly into the second piece of our talk, which is IT service. IT as a service industry. And I'm going to kind of give you an example. And one of the ways I'm going to do that is we're going to review Kirchhoff's voltage laws. How many of you remember that from school? Those of you with electrical engineering backgrounds like myself, let's do a deep dive into that. No, we are not going to it's too early in the morning to a deep dive into that. I remember when I was an undergraduate at the University of Illinois in Champaign, and I was taking an early morning, 8 a.m., circuit theory class, and I was like, am I going to really remember this, 20 years from now? And it turns out I didn't really need to remember it, because IT is transformed. You no longer need to understand the underlying circuit theory, right? So, no, we're not going to do that. So let me go into an example of a service industry that we can compare, that we're all familiar with, and kind of compare and contrast that with the view of IT. And here's what we're all very, very familiar with.
Much more appropriate for 8 a.m.
Yeah, much more. Yeah, definitely. David's right on. very much more, for those of you who are gracious enough to come in for an 8 a.m. talk, you are probably familiar with this. Getting your coffee in the morning, checking your very, very, very important emails, because all of us have to check our emails constantly. We know that's a fact, right? Because there's one thing that people complain about is if email is down, the whole company kind of shuts down. But yeah, so this is a model that we're all very familiar with. When you go in there, you expect a really nice environment, right? Picture this environment. People greet you with a smile, right? When you use the environment, do they ask you to pay for the table you're sitting at? Do they do anything along those lines? Do they ask you to pay for the coffee maker that they're going to use to create your coffee, or even part of the coffee maker, right? Are they going to say something like, oh, to take on this project of creating coffee for you this morning, we're going to have to allocate $20,000 to you all to give you your coffee? What? It better be good coffee for that much, right? I agree with you there.
When the amortization schedule of depreciation appears on your receipt at Starbucks,
yeah.
you know you're in trouble.
Yeah, that's not ideal. And the other thing is, do they ask you to pay for the salary of the staff, right? They don't say like, oh, we're going to need to charge you 0.2 or 0.5 FTEs for this project to make you coffee because you come in here every morning. Makes sense, right? We need to charge you for that. That's not happening, right? Because this is what would happen, right? If they did that to you, you'd be like crazy. You'd go crazy. You'd be like, this doesn't make sense. And what you're going to do is very often people will go somewhere else for that experience, right? Someone else will figure out a model that fits your needs, all right? And you've all seen this in IT as well, right? I've seen it so often. I used to work for the power company, like I mentioned, in Chicago. We had a really, I wouldn't say notorious, but like a really well-spoken, well-articulate VP of finance. Very, very often, he would go out and service his own IT needs externally without even contacting internal IT. Who has experienced anything like that? A few of y'all, right? Yeah, it's very common. He would pull out his Amex card, go to a service provider, or go to some consulting company and host those systems. And what they would do is they would try it out in that environment and then bring it in-house if needed. So IT was kind of consulted at the end. And that's not the model we want to foster going forward. So all these experiences can be transformational, as I mentioned. And hopefully you all aren't asleep at this point, but I was going to hand it off to David to share maybe some experiences in that space as well.
No, totally, right. So I don't think I've ever been to an office that doesn't have a coffee machine. But I also don't think I've ever been to an office at 8 a.m. that a third of the people aren't holding a Starbucks cup, right? The idea that people want the experience when they want it, they're bringing their own coffee. I think it was the original BYOC, was bring your own coffee. The whole concept around getting this service delivery model, my specific experience around this one is great. Anybody remember Cisco Meeting Place? You dial in, welcome to Meeting Place. We'd cheerfully greet you on every single conference call. That was one of our services in Cisco IT, was Cisco Meeting Place. And every single meeting that we held was on Meeting Place. And in IT, we used to brag about our service consumption. Month after month, we would show our port usage going up, up, up. Look how much we are the enabler of the business because we are helping people collaborate and they're consuming more ports. And then it leveled, and then it dropped, and we couldn't figure out what we were doing wrong, right? Maybe the business unit spun up a Meeting Place instance and people were jumping over to that one, or maybe, was there a big layoff that we didn't hear about? You start wondering, why is your port usage going down? So we called some of the top talkers and asked them, hey, we noticed you went from 400 minutes last month down to nothing. What gives? Anybody care to guess? Well, before Cisco owned WebEx, they were on Meeting Place. Somebody went and they swiped their credit card on WebEx so that they could do external meetings. And they started consuming it as a service. And they weren't getting it from IT, it was the line of business going out and deciding where they're going to get their services from. That's what I think is going to happen to all of us. Our lines of business, if you're in the IT side, our lines of business are going to go and procure their IT services where they can get the speed, the agility, the desktop that they want in order to deliver their need. And if IT isn't ready to do it, then we end up needing to be the IT police about what services you can or can't consume. So, you'd rather be the enabler of consumption of services as opposed to, a security gate.
Right.
Exactly. Keith, Sandra, any experiences?
Yeah, so as Sandra had mentioned, there's a pull from our communities now. IT in the past, we would always push out new features, and now with BYOD, it's always a pull. And the market is reacting with a consumption-based model. So no longer do you have to deliver that very expensive investment to get the first user on it. Now you can actually subscribe to these things, and it's basically transformational to the business as well as yours. So you don't have to send people for training. You don't have to invest time in research. You can subscribe to it today, and you can use it, and you can feel comfortable with it, and you can deliver somebody else's SLA. So it's really enabling us to support our communities that way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, as David was saying, is you have, you are going to have, and we see this all the time out there now, where you have lines of business, buying their own IT services, basically because they can. All you need is an Amex card, and you can go do that. And there are a lot of players, other service providers in the cloud space, where it makes it super easy to go and buy what you need, so that you can business units or lines of business can go around IT if they need to, or if they feel becoming a roadblock and a barrier. And so it really is now up to the IT staffs to be able to kind of stay ahead of it, know that, and adapt to it. You can't sacrifice things like security, because at the end of the day, it is going to be the IT department that's going to be in trouble if it's the CIO that's going to end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal if there's a major security breach or something like that, even if it was because a line of business went out and used their Amex card to buy services.
And as providers, we'll warn you, we don't discriminate against line of business buyers when they come to us, right? When your finance department, when your HR department comes seeking desktop as a service, we are happy to take their order.
Definitely.
Right. So there is that needing to balance and say, well, they want to adopt it because they're out trying to do it on their own, but there does need to be security policies and procedures, and compliance needs to be factored in, especially in particular vertical markets and things like that. And so I think working more collaboratively with the business units and understanding where, who needs these different technologies, who are going to be the early adopters, who can be almost that test case to really start to learn and help build the business case for maybe doing wider adoption, is going to be a key part of having a successful and economical, with a good return on investment in these services.
Oh yeah, definitely. This is, question? Yeah, go ahead. If you could come up to the mic.
So, one of the things is, especially like development teams, they're not anymore interested in just getting desktop, right? They want, they don't care about the terms that we use. They just want an environment that is already hooked up and that they can just go and start coding. But at the same time, I want to know from, any of the experiences as to, was there ever a situation, if you were to deliver, if you were either asked to deliver, or if you thought that if you don't deliver it, people are going to anyway circumvent? Did you have to do some kind of a TCO analysis and kind of justify? And second part of the question is, was there a situation where you said, you know what, this is the thing that they want, I'm going to deliver it, but then that also comes with added changes in the process and in the way things happen? And did you have to justify that what you were doing was the right thing for the company? I know it's a very loaded question, but
I think we might even touch on it maybe even in the third topic a little bit more, but what I would quickly call out is one of the main items when you get into the TCO analysis is one of the things that we're able to provide delivering this as a cloud service is predictability. And it's a whole lot easier to go and build a cost model knowing the rate card, knowing a 12-month term, a 36-month term, what it's going to cost each and every month, and what the SLA is that it's going to take to deliver that. And as someone that's built it myself for many, many years, what you get into when you build a TCO model for an internal investment is this stair step, where I need to make a very large CapEx outlay to buy the storage, and maybe that storage will get me, to 5, 7 servers worth of users, and then I have to make another big CapEx outlay. And so your investment becomes very lumpy and very much a stair step as your environment grows, and heaven forbid you ever then exceed the architectural capacity of the solution that you're delivering, and you need to start all over from scratch and reallocate those existing resources by new resources. So absolutely, does TCO come into account? Every single time. When I look over the last 7 years, all of the technology investments that we've done around desktop, everything has gone into 3 buckets. It's lowering the upfront CapEx, making better efficient use of physical resources, trying to improve the manageability so that it's easier to have a lower OpEx model, and to do both of those without sacrificing, as Sandra mentioned earlier, the end user experience. Those are the 3 levers of a TCO model. How am I driving down my infrastructure capacity costs, making it easier to manage, and not having my users give up and abandon the solution in the process?
Yeah. And I think some of the challenges too with looking at it from a TCO perspective is that there are some differences from doing it in more of a traditional, both traditional desktop management as most people do it today, as well as even kind of do-it-yourself VDI. There are different costs and hidden costs, and are you really capturing everything? Which is why I think a good suggestion, even though working for a service provider, we'd love to see everyone just do mass scale adoption of their service, is to do more of a pilot and look at it. Do a short-term pilot or trial period to really see, how does this impact not just the physical costs and really dollars and cents, but even just the time it requires your own IT staff to support it, and all those other kind of softer costs and hidden costs that are out there that you just may not even be capturing in a traditional TCO or ROI analysis.
How long have you guys seen POCs? How long has it taken for you to get a POC up of a VDI or a app publishing environment?
Well, that's a very good point. Yeah. So the beauty of this is now you're internalizing and you're actually building a framework. You have the ability to standardize. So today you may not have VDI, but tomorrow you may have it, and that gives you that capability of delivering a consistent build that you can deliver to certain customer groups. So you may have multiple images for different job functions, for example, but there's a standard there. And then to roll it out, now the change control, you may actually, depending on how you deploy it, you may actually be able to just create a new image and then roll it out to your community. They may not even know. So it's just how you actually deliver it. And then that just goes back to the TCO is, that labor cost and how many people that it takes from all the way from the desktop endpoint all the way to the back end, all of those individual costs and those skill sets and how many people that you have actually changes. It's almost the reverse. So you're actually getting a very small group supporting thousands of users potentially, rather than hundreds of your staff running around all over to different campuses trying to support the community.
Yeah, I mean, great examples. The only piece I want to add to that is now what cloud desktops also enable is they decouple the operating system from the application. You can not necessarily give a full desktop to an end user. If they need just access to 1 or 2 applications, you can just stream the application, right? So at that point, for that specific user, you need not necessarily worry about upgrading the operating system, the hardware, at the same time as the application. So good questions. Let me move right on to the last segment, which is TCO analysis. So, we've seen this happen, right? PCs, the cost of PCs. The next stage was VDI, right? Where you invested in sort of data center in a rack, something along those lines. I've worked with VDI implementations that use FlexPod or vBlock, whatever your experiences are. And then DaaS is the new model going forward. And you can see this in this graph as well as this next graph. The cost of the physical laptop to support it, the labor costs are the largest piece there, right? That's time and time again to support the DaaS environment when it's physical laptops. That's always the case. Whereas, say, with a DaaS, a cloud-based system, the cost of the underlying infrastructure that you're basically giving as an endpoint to your end user is the biggest piece, right? Your investment is primarily driven towards making sure that your customer, your end user, gets a great experience on the endpoint, whatever that may be, Google Chrome, laptop, etc. It's not sinking most of your costs into labor going forward. So I know this next slide is a little bit of an eye chart, but since this talk is about investments around the DaaS environment, I thought this should be included to make it complete. What I'm trying to show here is if you look at just the blue line, I'm trying to show that, as an example from the last graph, all I'm showing is when you're initially adopting cloud, there will be this potential uptick where you're managing both environments, both the cloud environment as well as your native environment, whatever that may be, laptops, desktops, etc. But once you've done that adoption, here I have a 3-year recovery model, right? After that 3 years, you basically go down in terms of your recovery costs, right? You've recovered your costs, you've depreciated over a 3-year, if that's what you're doing in your firm, and you're recovering that cost, and now you're stable at a very fixed, deterministic cost going forward. So these benefits, hopefully with the stories we all have shared, you've seen some of the benefits of cloud, right? Especially cloud desktops. Financial analysis, the whole change of IT service as exactly that, a service model going forward, especially with desktops. And I just want to thank you all for coming, but I want to share one last experience. So I'm enjoying San Francisco. I haven't been out here for a couple of years, but I'm staying at a beautiful hotel right here near Union Square. I happened to go into the business center, right, at the hotel, and I go in there, and there are 2 Apple desktops in there. And I want a PC. That's what I'm used to, right? So I go up there, being kind of hesitant, and I see on there that this is like desktop as a service. You can choose on the screen whether you want a PC or a Mac experience. You can also slide your credit card, and you can choose how you're consuming. You're billed at a minute-by-minute basis, right? And every time that system boots up, you get a fresh operating system. You don't have to worry about what the person before you did on that system in terms of security, what they were doing on that system. You get a brand new operating system. So that to me kind of crystallized. If the Marriott where I'm staying is doing this, right? This type of service is here to stay. They've, again, decoupled the hardware from the experience. And I think that's one of the real advantages that go towards supporting a DaaS environment in your platform. Thank you. Time for Q&A. If anyone has further questions, please come up to the mic. We also have Lakmal there with the portable microphone. Questions?
Thanks. Good morning. Can you flick back a couple of slides to the TCO for me?
Sure.
In my market, I'm from New Zealand, that's why I don't have an accent. We have a big problem with this sort of model. So when we go and speak with CFOs, they always want to compare 10,000 laptops over 3 years. And we're running a full desktop as a service model ourselves as a service provider. And so the issue that we have is it's never 10,000 desktops. They're trying to compare a standard usage over a period of time to a service that we know might be 100 users this month, it might be 120 next month, and it will peak and trough. And so we see this analysis creates a falsehood in the minds of the CFO, if you see what I'm saying, because they're comparing a static number of desktops and they've got no mechanism to be able to say, well, actually, what is my consumption rate? Or if I had to go provide to 11,000 users, actually, I've got that big tick up at this point. Or if I've dropping down to 9,000 users, I've got that lack of efficiency at that point in time. So what we're seeing is that there actually needs to be a different model, but a different model created that more accurately references the impact of any consumption model against a traditional CapEx-driven model. Mm-hmm. Have you guys seen anything of that, like that sort of thing coming out, or do you see it as a big gap? Or?
No, I completely follow what you're saying, and this is one of the really great benefits of being able to aggregate the CapEx spend into a cloud service across a large community. You can be very, very elastic, and it goes back to my predictable state. If I have a customer and he's at 500 desktops and immediately he needs another 5,000, it can be a very, very predictable experience for him to know what the cost delta is between 500 and 5,000. We can then go the other way. We can shrink from 5,000 back to 500. And again, he knows what he was spending before, he knows what he'll be spending after. That's just not the case with an on-premises infrastructure model. And so I don't want to abuse the term elastic, but the elasticity of the pricing models of a service consumption piece, I think is extremely attractive. The other part that backs a lot of that is all of those stair steps is being absorbed by the service provider. So that's an abstraction away that you never need to be concerned about. You'll never worry about, is my storage array going to grow from 5,000 users to 7,000 users? It's simply not your problem. The predictable spend that we're able to give back to the customer, I think, is helping in that. I understand what you're saying, that a CFO looking at a model today with a fixed set of desktops over a fixed set of time, frankly, that might actually push it away from the service delivery model. If they're expecting immediately day one that they're going to turn up 20,000 seats, and they're going to run 20,000 seats from day one to year 4, you're absolutely right. All the things that we need to take into account as service providers, we have to plan for ramps and onboarding and customer acquisition and pilots, all of that dead time coming up to when the customer's actually consuming.
Yeah, exactly. All those stair steps that David has mentioned are absorbed by the service provider, right? For example, laptop refreshes, right? I see many companies allocate multiple millions of dollars into funding a whole department where all they do is refresh laptops over a series of years, right? All the stair stepping is absorbed into that model. Did we help answer part of your question there?
Yeah, I'm tending to think there needs to be another line item added in for risk of overspend or risk of underspend sort of thing in that traditional CapEx model. I just wonder that we haven't yet, while we talk about desktop as a service, we haven't yet got to the point that we're actually educating the financial market about how to measure these things and how to compare and contrast models. And I suppose that was the big part of the question.
Yep,
All right, yeah, that'd be great. Come see us after the talk. We'll talk more. Great, good question. Thank you. Additional questions?
Along those lines, I have a comment, and one of the things is, it's great that you projected an 8-year. This is just an example, right? But one of the things that's actually happening in the industry is the rate of change is so much that a 3-year prediction, would actually, after 3 years, would not even be accurate in that sense, because things have changed. Maybe the rate of change is so much that the industry itself is actually gravitating in a different direction, and that causes a lot of changes to whatever analysis that we do, and especially taking into account a POC taking 1 year. I mean, like after the 1 year is when we will actually start implementing that approach, right? So in essence, there are so many changes that are a risk to, some of these analysis. Sometimes it just blows my mind. I just wanted to share. It just blows my mind that, we put so much effort, so much time into this, and it almost seems worthless at the end of 3 years.
Good point. Thank you. Thank you. Additional questions? Comments? Great. All right. Thank you. Thanks for coming in this morning.